So welcome. My name is Noémie Ott. I'm the chair of the Young EFC. I'm very happy to welcome you on day 2 of our Young EFC Create Correct summer school. This morning we will talk about corrosion issue in the biomedical application, and I'm very happy to have Claude Rieker with us. Anna, maybe you can introduce him.
Yes. Thank you, Noémie. My name is Anna Igual. I'm a scientist, a corrosion scientist, indeed, at EPFL in Switzerland, in Lausanne, and it's my great pleasure. I'm here just to to have the honor to introduce our first speaker is Claude Rieker. Is somehow you will see is the encyclopedia, no, of biomedical implants. Apart, he started at all of us at the university. He did the master thesis in the master at the EPFL, then a PhD in metallurgy in Neuchâtel in Switzerland. And then from there on, he worked for a biomedical company, indeed one that was changing the name no, from year to year. And now, since last year, he has launched his own company, OrthoSave. So I think it's I think you will learn a lot about this huge experience, also with a scientific perspective, not only commercial one that we think about companies. So he was involved in research and development since the very beginning in the biomedical company. Okay, so Claude, please.
Thank you. First, thank you for this kind of invitation. Quite to be honest, it was a big pleasure to work on corrosion because I am working in this field for more than 35 years, almost 35 years. And to be honest, I was always very surprised by the lack of corrosion knowledge in this field. And I will show you some example. But somebody make a mistake in the late 80s, early 90s, and after people who don't understand corrosion just repeat the mistakes like parrots, and after you have this wrong statement, which is going on, and I will give you 3 examples, and I think there is a huge demand to have better corrosion in this field. I will make at the beginning a small introduction to what is hip and knee joint. And after, I will speak about galvanic corrosion, something which is called MAC. You will see what it is. It's not a Macintosh because we have 2C. After, something which is very crazy, the inflammatory cell-induced corrosion with question marks. And after, also something which is for me very important is the interaction between implant, patient, and surgeons. Because if a patient will want to be happy, he needs not only to have a good implant which not corrode, but also a good surgeon. Okay. First, why do we need sometimes hip arthroplasties? I think we try to move. There is this stupid or good rule. We must make 10,000 steps per day in order to stay healthy. Whether it is true or not true, I don't know. But if you want to walk, whether it is to make some shopping in the old town where you live, or if you go to the Alps, or even if you make a trekking in Himalaya, you need to have a good hip. It means you need to have a cartilage at the surface between the femoral head and the acetabulum. If you have a cartilage, it is a low friction situation, and it can last for almost forever. But for any reason, if you are losing your cartilage, you start to have at this interface a bone-to-bone contact, and it is very painful. Of course, you can take some medication, you can do a few things, but after a couple of years, the only way to cure this disease is quite simple, is to implant a hip joint. There is no way, if you have arthrosis, the solution is a hip joint. And here you see an example. You have a stem into the femur. you have a ball head, which is in ceramic. And after you have component in the pelvis, you have a metallic shell. And what is white, it is typically an insert which is made in polyethylene. And of course, you have a lot of materials. You have a good biocompatibility. But if you have materials, you have interface, for example, between the ball head and the stem, or between the liner and the shell. And if you have interfaces, you know it is prone to have some corrosions. When we speak about hip implant, first, it is a large business because you do see here, for example, there is about more than 2 million implantation per year. If you see the cost of such an implant, and please don't ask me why, it is much more expensive in the US than in Europe. For the time of operation, it is done typically in 1 hour. And another thing, it is quite important because after the patient is walking, and it means each step is a cycle. It means you have not only, for example, some fatigue, if you speak just on the mechanical point of view, but if you have cycles, you know, for example, threatening corrosion could be an issue. But if you see the number of cycles what should survive an implant, I would say between 5 millions up to more than 200 millions. And if you ask how many years will the patient can use this implant, sometimes it is a couple of weeks, because if the implant was mal-placed, the surgeon needs to revise. And if everything is fine, it can go up to 40 years. There is even some publication demonstrating patients with more than 50 years. Okay. If you see for the history, the first successful hip joint was implanted in 1962 by a surgeon, Charnley, in England, and he was using stainless steel together with polyethylene. And it was the first successful hip joint on the market. Another point which is important, it is in 1974, we started also to use ceramic head on polyethylene. And here, for example, it was introduced by a Swiss surgeon, Maurice Müller, who was working at that time in Bern. Now, just to give you a flavor of the results, I like to go in registry because there you do see the full picture of one country. And here in Australia, which is good, it means it is starting more than 20 years ago. And all the implants implanted in Australia are within the register, because if the surgeon forget to put the implant in the register, he is not paid. And I think it's a very good way to motivate surgeons to put to register everything what they are doing. And here you see for different ages the result at 20 years. And if you see, for example, if the patient is younger, it means it is more active. At 20 years, you have number of revision is 9.5%. And after it is decreasing when the patient are more and more older. Another point which is quite important is to see what's happened at the beginning. At the beginning, you have a huge, because the slope here is much higher compared to here. And here it is, for example, if a surgeon is doing a malpositioning of the implant for this reason, he has to fix it and he has to do it immediately. It means what we do see here, it is nothing to do with corrosion, nothing to do with implant. It is just a malpositioning of the implant, and the guy who is guilty, it is the surgeons. And it is a very successful operation. And for example, in the Lancet in 2007, it was say it is an operation of the century, of the last century, because it was the operation for the whole medicine having the best long-term results. Now, it was a small introduction. And now another point which is very important, because if I go back, of course, here you start to see here some revision. And the question is why, for example, you have a revision after 15 or 18 or 20 years. And here there is a concept, which is a very old concept, which is called the particle disease. It was described for the first time in 1974 by a Swiss scientist, Manfred Semlich. He was working at that time in Winterthur together with a German professor, which was at that time in Frankfurt. And they had a look to the tissue around a failed implant. And they were able to see in the histology a lot of particles. It can be polyethylene. It is here the white point that you have here. It can be bone cement, like you see here. But they start to see if there is too much particles in the tissue, you start to have a reaction. And they make this very old slide. I like that because it was the original of 1974. At that time, PowerPoint was not existing. It means it was color by hand and these kind of things. But if you have a low wear situation, it means you don't have much wear between the head and the liner. The small particles that you have here are transported by the lymphatic tissue and you have a stable situation. If you have too much amount of particles, and it can be wear due to the bearing, but also it can be corrosion product. It means you have this debris which start to accumulate around the joint, what we call the joint space. And after you will see a cascade of reactions. And at the end, the cascade of reactions start to activate the osteoclast. The osteoclasts are the cell we are eating the bone. It means due to the particle, either due to wear or to corrosion, you are starting to lose the fixation of the implant with the human body. And when you don't have this fixation anymore, the surgeon needs to revise. It means what we call the particle disease. And here there is a very easy way to understand. I think this one was done in the mid-90s. You have the wear particles, having a cascade of reaction with macrophages. You have cytokine around, and after you have the activation of the osteoclast, and you are eating the bone around the joint. If you want to see something more modern, here's something it is in press, but you have exactly the same cascade of reactions. You have here the implant debris. It can be wear, it can be corrosion. You have here ions around. You have the macrophages. You have a cascade of reactions, but at the end, you activate the osteoclast, and it means you increase the bone resorptions, and also the osteoblasts, which are the cells creating the bone. We are the activation of the osteoblast is much lower. It means you lose the balance between creation and the resorption of the bone, and by this way, there is a loosening of the implant, and when you have the loosening, it means the implant must be revised. Okay, it was a small introduction, but you do understand what is a hip joint, why is wear and why is corrosion so important. And now I will give you 3 examples demonstrating that it is urgent to have a better understanding of the corrosion around hip and knee joint, and I think also for the whole medtech world. Of course, when we work, you have seen before the hip implant, you have some materials, and of course, in order to prove that you have a good biocompatibility, you need to have an ISO standard demonstrating it is working. For example, here you have one example from analog titanium. I took also here another example for polyethylene. But if you see a hip joint, you have the stem, The stem is usually made in an alpha beta titanium alloy. It means you have titanium, 6% aluminum, and 4% vanadium. You have the alpha beta structure. And you can see here the first edition of this ISO was made already in 1983. If you have a look now for the ball head, the ball head mainly is made in a cobalt chrome alloy. It is kind of steady 21. And you have two quality. You have the cast, where you see here the carbide from the dendritic carbides. And here you have the wrought version. The composition is exactly the same, but you can see also here that the first edition was quite old, 1978 for the cast and 96 for the wrought alloy. It means they are fixed alloy, and the whole industry is working with this type of alloys. And of course, when you speak to the surgeons saying, okay, you put two metals together, are you crazy? You are doing a battery. Okay, it means, and you can see, and there is a lot of paper saying, don't do that. I think it is quite interesting because I think it was started to be used in the mid-70s. And now it is 50 years after. There is millions and millions of patients having a cobalt chrome head on a titanium stem, and nothing happens, but you have still people saying, don't do that. If you see here, for example, one of the paper, it was published in 1990 from a group in the US, saying the corrosion that occur at the interface between titanium alloy and a cobalt head is galvanic in nature. It was published in 90. And after, you can see here, for example, something in 2008, or here we speak about previous corrosion, which doesn't exist in orthopedics, at least on the old hip and knee joint. But they start to speak of galvanic element driving crevice corrosion. And I am very sorry, it is wrong. The one I prefer is that one, because it was coming in 2018 from a group of the Imperial College in London. We speculate, and I love the term speculate because I don't think it is very scientific. Blah, 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 saying, okay, but its strength, the electronic corrosion between the ball head and the stem. Sorry, it is bullshit. And it is a shame that it was published in the nice journals. But it is just demonstrating that people who review this type of paper don't have a clue about corrosion. They are biomechanical, they are surgeons, they are whatever you want, but they don't have a good understanding what's happened. Here, of course, you may know these people. I think this person here is somewhere here. And I think it was a very nice study, having a look, example, what's happened between titanium and cobalt chrome in human synovia. And the conclusion is very clear. The two metals exhibit very similar open circuit potential, and therefore there is no galvanic corrosion between cobalt chrome and titanium alloy in the human body. I hope that this type of paper will be a small step in the good direction, just demonstrating stop to speak about galvanic corrosion because it is almost impossible in the human body with titanium alloys and cobalt chrome alloys. It was one of the first examples demonstrating that there is a huge lack of corrosion understanding in the field of orthopedics. Another point, which is also very funny, it is what it is called MAC. MAC, it is for mechanical assisted crevasse corrosion. And we start to see, for example, on retrievers, it means when the implant was not working as expected. It is removed from the body, and we have a look to what's happened in vivo. And we start to see here with the taper connection between the large head and the stem. You can start to see here some corrosion of this interface. You can see also here at the taper for another bearing, you see here some corrosion debris, and if you measure the amount of wear, you can see here, for example, you see the wear is measurable. It means you have some corrosion at this interface. Also, you have sometimes another type of modarity. It is between the stem and the neck. And also here you do see some corrosion on retrievals. And here it is what was developed in the early 90s for mechanically assisted crevasse corrosion. And I remember, maybe it was 15 years ago, I was in the same office with Stefano Michler. And he said, Claude, sorry, it is bullshit. And he tell me it is bullshit because it is almost impossible to have at the same time some crevice corrosion and some fretting. It's either or. And after the group of Stefano Michler was working for many, many years, once again, here you see the same person that I showed you before, and saying, trying to mimic some crevice corrosion in the lab with the implant and the geometry that we have, it is clear there is no crevice corrosion on hip joint. End of the story. It's mean if you don't have the crevice corrosion, you have the fretting corrosion. And now if you have taper, and now people are working to see what's happening at this interface. For example, here with FE, for example, try to see the micromotion that you have at the interface, whether it's stumble when the patient is working, going upstairs, downstairs, and so on. People try to estimate the micromotion that you have at this interface. If you want to minimize the micromotion, if you want to minimize the fretting corrosion, per definition, you need to have a stable fixation. I think it is what we call in French une lapalissade. It means it is a true, it is true per definition. And in order to minimize the micromotion that you have on the taper, I just took here a very old paper because it is easy to be understood. And this taper, I was working also here for many, many years on this topic. And even if it is the first paper in this field, the conclusion of this paper are still valid today. You have these equations where you have the angle of the taper, you have the coefficient of friction at this interface, and in order to know the fixation that you have to first to impact. And after, if you know the impaction force, you can calculate the fixation force, and the higher, the better. The definition, if you want to minimize the micromotion. But you need to know the coefficient of friction, and it is typically for this type of connections 0.2. And now, if you take this equation, you take an impact forces of 5,000 newtons, and you make a graph where you see here the fixation forces. And here you see the percentage between the impaction force and the fixation force for an angle that we use in orthopedics. You have this type of behavior. I told you if it is dry on dry, you have maybe 0.2. But you can see, for example, if you are decreasing for any reason the coefficient of frictions, it is becoming to lower. And even if you have here the coefficient of friction of 0 or 5, you don't have any connections. To demonstrate that it is true, for example, here a paper which was done 8 years ago. You see here taper, and you see here on the taper you have fat or some saline solution, and after you have the impactions, and after they try to remove the head and to see what's happened. And you can see the results. For example, what is gray, it is metallic head. What is pink, it is a ceramic head. With this setup, if everything is pristine, the pull-out forces of the head was between 2,000 Newton and 2,500 Newtons. If you have some fat, it means the coefficient of friction is very, very low. You don't have any fixation. Exactly what I show you on the graph. If it is below 0.05, you don't have any fixation. And if you clean, you're coming back to exactly the same situation. If you put some water, it is quite interesting because it can go to very low. It means you have a good lubrication, or maybe you can go even to very high. Maybe here you have some stiction. But it means you have here a huge variation. And if you clean, you're coming to the same value. And here for me, it is very important because during the surgery, the surgeon is controlling this interface. And if a surgeon is doing a good job, you are here. If he's doing a bad job, you can be here or you can be anywhere here. Demonstrating that the surgeon is very, very important. And here's the conclusion of this paper saying the surgeon needs to clean before assembly in order to minimize the risk of threatening corrosion. Last topic on corrosion, it was inflammatory cell-induced corrosion with question marks. Why? Because you have this paper here, which was published in 2014, saying that you may have some corrosion of the copper-chrome alloys due to the cells. The first time I was reading this paper, I couldn't really understand. And for example, we're saying, okay, you have the biology try to to fight against the metal. It means you have the osteoclast, the macrophages, and they are activated because you do have a piece of metal. These cells do migrate on the surface of the metal and attach, and you have a sealing of the membrane of the cells on the metal. And under the metal, you start to see some oxygen species, for example, hydrogen peroxide, and even hydrochloric acid, which was say it is very, very strange. And after you have this secretion create a highly oxidation microenvironment. And after you have kind of Fenton-like reaction. To be honest, I don't understand what is a Fenton-like reaction, but it is maybe due to my bad knowledge on this field. And at the end, you have a corrosion of the metal. And they give here some example on retrievals. And they are saying it is here due to this cell-induced corrosion, it is what you have. I was very, very surprised. And a couple of years after, another paper was saying, okay, we need to revisit this concept. And if you have a look on retrievals with a large number, more than 700, and also they took with a surgeon in VOR in order to cut the tissue or to coagulate the vessels, have this electrocautery. And of course, if you have a contact between the electrocautery device and the metal, you create a sparks. And these sparks, okay, do create some damage on the metal. And here they were able to show that what the other paper was saying, it is inflammatory cell-induced corrosion, were actually artifacts due to the electrocautery during revision. And here you see, for example, from the second paper, you can see exactly the same kind of surfaces, but it was due here to the contact between the electrocautery and the metal. It is maybe the third example, but you can see something very interesting statement about corrosion in the medtech or in orthopedics, which is absolutely wrong. Okay, now I change gears, and I want to also to give you another feeling what's happened when you have a failure about hip and knee joint. Because of course, the surgeons, the patient, and the industry, the goal is then a patient receive an implant, the implant will survive the patient. It means there is no revision when the patient is alive. And there is, for me, always a triangle between the surgeons, the patient, the old lady can be happy or not happy. And of course, here you have the implant. And I will go for the three aspect to give you some hint. And after I will give you the full picture. When we speak of surgeons, you may have a nice, young, good surgeons, or you may have another surgeons. And of course, when you are young, it means you don't need a hip joint, but maybe your grandparent need to have a hip joints. And it is very difficult for a patient to know whether it is such a good surgeons or such a bad surgeons. And I give you another example. I think everybody knows this car. But even James Bond, or people think they are James Bond, may have this type of issue. And if you try just for the drivers, try to understand who had the responsibility of such an accident. And it is in 95, it is human factor, saying it is a driver. And there is only 5%, which is due either to the mechanical factor of the car or the road infrastructure. It means who is creating the accident? It is the driver. And also, for example, surgeon may have a bad day. When it is a well-known X-ray, you see the femur here with some cement, and the stem is placed outside the femur. It means, okay, it is a worst case scenario, but it is not impossible. When you speak about patient, also patients are very important. Because patients are younger, and sometimes also the activity of the patient is increasing. And if it is younger, just by the younger age, also the implant need to survive longer. Mm-hmm. There is an old paper, it is now almost 30 years old, demonstrating, okay, here it was the activity, the number of steps per day of patient. You see a trend, the older the lower, but you see here a huge variation. It means you have patients who are barely moving, and you have patients also here in the early 70s making more than 1,700, 70,000, sorry. I was looking for 1,000 steps per day. Also to demonstrate some very old patients are quite active. I like this type of the World Master Athletic Championship. And it is here man about 90 running 100 meters. And I think they are very cute. And the time you are doing is not too bad. It means also very old patient can also be very active. Another point also which is quite important, I think we are all, with the exception of Anna, we are increasing weight. And But maybe for hip joint to increase weight is maybe good, because if you're increasing weight, it means you're not moving. If you're not moving, it means you don't put much cycle on your implant. But sometimes I was asking, where are we today in the human development? Because if you see, well, of course, it is quite provocative. This means sometimes I'm just wondering, where are we today? But it's another story. But another point, which is also for me very, very important, and here once again, Anna, I think it was, for me, it was one of the most fascinating study I read for the last 10 years, saying what's happened if you make a corrosion cells and you are using human cerebral fluid, which is taken during the surgery. And here saying for the cobalt chrome alloys, if you see the corrosion rate, you have a variation between 50 and 750 milligram per square decimeters per year. It means you have here a factor 15 between the less corrosive synovial fluid and the more corrosive synovial fluid. It means the patient himself, his biology, and also his genetic do play a huge role. And here, the next study of the same group saying, okay, if you can have a look now to this type of in vivo corrosion, you may have even to have 2 orders of magnitude between the less corrosive people and the more corrosive people. It means the human body also play a huge role. So last point, the industry. I think it is also quite interesting to see that if you see here the revenue of just for hip and knee implant for the large industry, it is about 8 billion per year. And of course, if something is done wrongly in the production, the whole industry must make a recall. Sometimes it is a small details. For example, here it is a shoulder implant. And for example, here there was a defect in the diameter of a borehole. It means if it is seen immediately, it is possible to remove this implant before they were implanted. It is a best case scenario. If the defect of the implant is seen after implantation, it starts to be much more tricky. One example, a well-known example, it is a metal implant from the pew, and they have to make a recall in August 2010 after it was implanted in a large number of patients. I think it is one of the first records that you even have a Wikipedia web page. And you can see here is the number of patients who were involved. 93,000. And of course, you have the revision, you have the claim of the patient, and at the end, it costs to G&G the small amount of 2.5 US billions in order to settle this record. It means a mistake can be very, very expensive. Another example, which is even, it is nothing to do with orthopedics, with corrosion, sorry. It was a ceramic head, which was in zirconia, and it was a small manufacturer in France, in Évreux. And they changed the type of furnace they were using in order to make the fretting of the ceramic head. The fracture rate was, with a good furnace, 1 on 10,000. And suddenly, on one badge, the fracture rate was almost 50%. And the fracture rate was such high, but if you take the Journal officiel de la République française, donc the national journal of the French state, they were saying all the implant made with this type of furnace have to be recalled immediately, and it is impossible to be sold in France. Of course, when you have a small company and you're unable to sell your implant, the reputation is destroyed. It means not only the zirconia had disappeared from the market, but also this company then were bankrupt in January 2003, and they have to fire all his employees. It means even if you are doing something wrong in the production, whether it is due to corrosion, a bad design, or a mistake during the manufacturing, it can kill your company. And it means what I don't like today, when something is going wrong, the surgeon is saying the patient is crazy, he is never happy, or the implant was mal manufactured. The manufacturer was saying crazy surgeons unable to implant or crazy patient. And the patient is saying crazy surgeon or crazy implant manufacturer. And you have a fight around. And I think it is a really bad situation. But at the end, it is very expensive. And the only thing we are winning here are just the lawyers fighting each other. And I think it is not a good development of orthopedics I've seen in the last 35 years. Last slide before I conclude. It was also published in 2017. And just maybe take 15 seconds to go through the slide because I think it is very important. It means we have the patient surgeon's implant. It is a complex system. A small change can lead to a problem. And everything is multifactorial. And it is almost impossible for most of the cases to find one single root cause. To conclude, I show you that total hip replacement, it is the operation of the last century because it is very, very successful. I show you the result of the Australian register. Even for younger patients, you have less than 10% revision after 20 years. There is a serious lack of understanding in orthopedics about corrosion because people working in this field don't have enough background in corrosion. I give you 3 examples. Galvanic corrosion. We speak about galvanic corrosion since the early 90s. This mechanical-assisted crevasse corrosion, it is also an instance, also from the early 90s. And here, this pseudo-new type of corrosion, which was discovered maybe 10 years ago, was just an artifact due to the electrocautery contact between the instrument and the metal. If you want to understand what's happened in vivo, I think you need to have a look for the patient, for the surgeons, and for the implant. And the surgeons don't like me when I say such a thing, but it is like the drivers. If you have a car accident, the driver, in 95% of the situation, bear the responsibility. I think a point which is quite important, we need to have a better understanding of the biology and the genetic of the patient because it has a huge impact on the interaction between the synovial fluid and the material we use for implant. And last point, if a product is recalled, it can be very expensive. example, with 2.5 billion for Johnson & Johnson, or if the company is not large enough, the company can go bankrupt. It is what I wanted to tell you. I am lucky to live in Switzerland, and it is a small village, which is quite funny. If you speak German, the name of my village is Dorf, which means village. It means I live in a village called village. And if you have any questions, you can reach me anytime, and I will be more than happy to give you an answer.
Thank you, Claude, for this very nice presentation and for showing a bit which idea or preconceived idea still exists in the field.